it's time to go. So that is the signal, guys, that we are starting our strength programming and progression webinar. And Carl and I are going to be hitting on 4 really common reasons that lifters hit plateaus, which is like just the most frustrating thing. And we want to give you some things to work with to actually be able to avoid those common plateaus that you may be struggling with. So quick run through of the agenda. We're going to hit first on some basic principles. We've shared a lot of free information and then, in our CCP program as well on these ideas before. So the strength life cycle and the learn, grow, express frameworks. But Carl is going to revisit them because even if you've heard this stuff 1,000 times, it's good to really hammer those principles home. We will talk through for the bulk of the webinar, the 4 reasons for common strength plateaus and how to avoid them. And then again, we'll have Q&A at the end. So just as a reminder, ask your questions in the chat box as we're going. If we have time to answer them or it's really relevant to the conversation in that moment, we'll do our best to get them answered. But otherwise, if we don't give you an answer right away, just take a note and then we will have dedicated time at the end to be able to answer all of those questions, okay? So Carl, I'm going to pass it to you to start us off with the strength life cycle.
Awesome. Yeah, I think to start, it might be beneficial to talk about what the heck strength is. Like what is a common definition of strength? And gosh, I go back to, it was probably 8 or 10 years ago. I was at a seminar with Ripito and he asked that question and there was probably 30 people in the room and he actually went around the room and he like had everyone define what strength means for them. And you can kind of see like person number 1, it was really simple. And then by the time we got to person number 15, it was like this very elaborate definition of what the hell does it mean to be stronger? What is a common definition of strength? And essentially what we walked out of that with was what we all thought it was before, right? But it was an awesome exploration of ideas going around the room. And that common definition was the ability to move external load against resistance or the ability to move force against an external load, right? So it's force and load or force and resistance. So strength is just so simple, right? Strength is very simple. It gets a little complex when we're like, what is strength for my function and how strong do I need to be and how do I get there and all of that. I think we make it very complex when we start talking about those things, but I think we all need to agree on what the hell strength is, right? And it's just that ability to move or ability to produce force against an external load or resistance. So with that being said, the next couple of slides, we just want to lay out a framework and then we want to talk about implementing that framework because I think we all know what strength is. It's just moving more load or producing more force. But we sometimes get lost in giving that to clients, right? Like we get to the classic example that we always use is like you have this solid game plan and you get halfway through a training cycle and then you just go off the rails for whatever reasons, because the game plan isn't working or your client is asking for other things or they're not on board with linear periodization and putting like a little bit of load on the same movement each week. And then we get off the rails. So that's why we want to walk through this strength life cycle. And then we want to walk through some implementation of the strength life cycle. So what you're seeing on the screen is, I was going to say fairly simple, but if you've never seen this, it might look a little bit complex. All this is looking at is what is your client's training age from novice all the way up to grandmaster. So novice, let's just think about someone that just started training, right? 1 or 2 years or 0 years training age. We get to that intermediate stage, right? Now we start to look at what kind of splits we should be doing, how many sessions we should be doing in resistance per week, what kind of contractions we should be focusing on, what our goal is in strength training, and what the metabolic support is. Let's not talk too much about the metabolic support today. Let's just focus on the strength aspect. But as you see, a novice, we're working on motor control or just learning patterns, Once that novice has accomplished that, now we go to that intermediate stage. Patterns are learned, and now we're building some endurance on that strength. So what the heck is the definition of strength endurance, right? Just think about everything that you gain in learning, motor learning or motor control, right? Let's take a squat pattern, for instance. Let's go more specific. Let's take the back squat, for instance. You learn how to move that load through that pattern very, very effectively over a couple years. What does that look like in design? That might be slow time under tension. That might be higher volume. That might be lighter loads. And you just master that movement. And now you're moving to strength endurance, and you might be adding some load, and you're also adding some volume and going at a little bit faster speeds. So think about, instead of doing 10s at 30x1, you're doing 15s at 20x1, right? And maybe rest time between sets is a little less and all of that. So we're adding on strength endurance. Then we get to the advanced stage, and we're adding some max contractions. So maybe we're hitting some 1, 2s, and 3s. Whereas on the novice stage, we might have been hitting 8, 10, 12s. When we go to strength endurance, we're hitting 10, 12, 15s. Now we're going all the way down and we're hitting some really tough singles, doubles, and triples. All right. So that's like the height of peak performance, right? Like we're at that advanced stage. And now we call that, resisting entropy. So now we start going on the other side of that curve, and we're in that master and grandmaster stage. So think, as an advanced trainee, you've been training for 10 years and your biological age is 30, right? You get to 17 years and your biological age is 37. You're now at that master stage, right? So you're trying to not lose all those strength gains that you've accomplished over the last 17 years. So now we're going back to motor learning and strength endurance. Now you're a grandmaster, you're 65 years old, and you've been doing this thing for 4 decades. Now you're just working on patterns and ensuring that you still have the attributes that you gained as a novice and being able to move through those patterns appropriately. So that's kind of the short of it, of the strength life cycle. But what that does is it gives us a really good framework to look at and understand what should we be doing with our clients depending on where they are in the strength life cycle.
You guys don't need to remember like all of the details right here, but we are going to be referencing this notion of the strength life cycle a little bit later on. So hold it up there in your brain that it's really important. So let's move on now to Learn, Grow, Express, Carl, and what that framework really means.
Yeah, definitely. So we actually implemented this framework, probably 4 to 6 months ago in a class that we did in LearnRX. And the goal here was to connect intention behind what we're doing in resistance training, right? So since we're talking about strength and gaining strength today, we're more leaning on the right side of things. We're looking at expressing, producing as much force as possible against those external loads. So now when we look at express, it's like, what does that look like, right? Contractions have to be controlled. I saw like a 00x0. We're probably not doing that in the express stage, right? We're very controlled. Loads are very heavy relatively. Nervous system is very, very taxed, right? We'll talk about recovery in a little bit, but the nervous system is what you need to focus on. And you also need to focus on lots of recovery. In this stage of training, you're not focused on doing more, building muscle, seeing how much or how little recovery you can get away with. And then as we go to the left, this actually focuses on, learning motor control and growing in strength endurance. So essentially, when we start talking about hypertrophy training, you're living in the middle zone, right? We're growing moderate speeds, moderate loads, high volume. You're looking for that quote unquote pump, right? If the goal is to build muscle tissue. So just like we wanted to show you the framework, but don't focus too much on that grow piece today. But this kind of, centers us in terms of what the heck are we trying to do with our clients? And like I said, we do have a class in LearnRX on this, and we break it down more specifically and lay out what exercise selection could look like in Learn, Grow, and Express. And I think it's really cool language to use with your clients, right? Where it's like, what's the goal of this cycle? It's like, we're learning, we're growing, we're expressing, right? And that really can connect your client to that outcome or that end goal.
All right. So we've laid the foundation with the strength life cycle and then Learn, Grow, Express. And again, these are going to be referenced throughout the bulk of this conversation. But now we're going to turn to 4 of the really common reasons that lifters plateau in strength development, and then provide some ways that you can think about actually addressing them so you don't run into those issues yourself. We did tease these 4 reasons on Instagram a couple days ago. So for people that follow us there, they may already be familiar, but now we get to have a really, deep conversation around what it means to actually fix them. So let's focus on that black box highlighted on the left now, with our first problem being just not being ready to be strong. What do we think about to overcome that problem? And I guess backtracking a little bit, what does it mean when I say not ready to be strong, Carl?
Yeah, it's just, I know it's on the screen, but, looking at the strength life cycle and where your clients are in that life cycle, gosh, trust me, it's very easy to onboard a new client that wants to be strong and really lean into those beginner gains and give them a program that they actually shouldn't be doing yet because they would see results in a program that's more appropriate for them. What do I mean by that? Go back to the strength life cycle and what we talk about there. People will get strong through learning patterns of movement or learning specific exercises. They will, right? Like if someone is brand new off the street, if you just say do sets of 10 for the next year, that person is going to get stronger. If you're like waving appropriately and you're making sure you're not overdoing it and all of that, that person can get stronger on 10s for a really long time. But it's so easy to say, we're going to go 10s and then we're going to go 8s and then we're going to go 6s and then we're going to go all the way down to 2s and singles. And then we're high-fiving with our clients because we're hitting 1 rep maxes. So I've been there. I've done that, right? Like I've been a part of that game. But if the goal is to get strong for as long as possible, that's not the route you should take. The route you should take is that of patience, right? So I think when we look at, not ready to be strong, that's on the coach and giving clients prescriptions that they can do, right? Like they can recover from, they can get stronger off of that. But if we're looking at getting stronger over a long period of time, right? Remember what I said, like I'm a decade in and I still want to get stronger. And then I'm 17 years in and now I'm just trying to not get weaker. We're going to set that curve a lot further to the right if we honor that strength life cycle. And that's just principles, right? Like we created that graphic and we put it up there, but that's nothing new. There's nothing new in that graphic. We're just taking some principles and trying to simplify those things. So I think this is a very common one from a coach's standpoint, and it's definitely a common one from a client standpoint that just Googles a templated strength program and says, I need to do 5-3-1 to get really strong. Nothing wrong with 5-3-1 for some people, but for a novice client that doesn't have motor patterns mastered, they probably shouldn't be jumping to 5-3-1 training programs.
What are like some of the issues with jumping into a 5-3-1 training program other than like they're not ready to express it yet? What could be then causing a plateau in the future or blunting their like long-term potential there, Carl?
Yeah, well, let's imagine that person is capable of it, because there are a lot of people that are capable of doing 5-3-1, day one. Like they haven't mastered movement patterns, but they're good enough. But what we start to look at is, I wish I had like something I can draw a curve, right? That curve, right? The curve that we're trying to like do this for a long period of time. That's the goal, right? Like, I think that's the goal for most people. It's like, I want to be as strong for as long as possible, right? If that curve goes like this, Georgia, and we peak that person, quote unquote, too early, think about what was in the program to get there. And I don't want to like poo-poo 5-3-1. It's not a bad program, but let's say it was that, but the person, they could have gotten stronger on a different program that was more appropriate for them. Once they peak, now what do you do? Right now, what do? You now have to move to more advanced methods of training. And I know we talked about this a couple of months ago. I think it was on a podcast or something, but something that really hits home to me is we actually don't want to do advanced training methods with clients if we don't have to. We want to do the simplest things for as long as possible and save the advanced methods when shit gets hard, right? Like when gains are now hard to come by. Right? Imagine doing clusters and drops and all that stuff with clients year one. What are you going to do year 5? Try to recycle that same training program that you've already utilized with them, right? And that thing that really rings true to me, it's like no one wants to be using advanced methods, right? When you go to the doctor, you don't want to go to the ICU to receive the most advanced medical techniques that are out there. You want to just see a doctor and be like, oh yeah, you're all good. Take this thing. You're fine. Go home, do this. Right. So I think we want to stay away from advanced techniques until we have to use those advanced techniques.
Is it fair to say that someone could actually get stronger faster as a novice going down the route of like an advanced, incredibly high volume, really tough training program, then doing the, learn first approach that you're talking about?
Oh gosh, absolutely. And that curve might not just be like, well, six months or 6 weeks, and like they're gonna start getting weaker. A novice training, let's be honest, they can ride that shit for like years, right? 1, 2, 3 years. And if that's their goal, it's like if someone gets in front of you and they're like, I want to be as strong as possible in the next 24 months, and I don't care what happens after that. It's like, okay, maybe you go to some more advanced things in program design to give that person. But I don't think most people are saying that. Most general population people, they're like, I want to peak when I'm 35, and I don't care if it's all downhill from there. I say that because I'm 35.
All downhill, Carl.
I know, right? Hey, I'm like, I'm still doing this ever so slightly in my head, at least. Maybe not in reality.
Oh, well, I think it's a conscious decision on the part of the coach to be okay with that, right? Clients have trust in their coaches and they will ultimately listen to what they have to say. But as a coach, you have to decide that you are playing the long game in strength development and you're not going to go to the advanced shit right away because that's just not a part of your value system and what you believe. And that, again, can be like a little bit of a challenging, almost a hit to the ego, right? Where we're like, we want to get people strong. We want to see those PRs. Like I know that temptation and that feeling, but we have to decide like what are our values around fitness and what do we want for our clients?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Should we dig into problem number 2? Are you ready for it?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's roll problem number 2, maybe right into 3. Because there's a lot of connections there.
There definitely is. I'm just trying to get my slide to change and it doesn't want to do it, which is great. I'm wondering if Google Slides is frozen on me.
It's okay. We can all see it. We're all good.
That's the nice thing about this graphic, right?
Yeah,
it may not be highlighted black like we want it to be, but problem number 2 is visible, and that is not honoring physiology.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot inside of this, going back to the definition of strength and what that whole thing looks like. In problem number 2, let's really just focus on recovery outside of the gym or recovery outside of exercise and program design. Gosh, yeah. I mean, broken record for you guys that have been on these webinars or have heard anything that we've ever said, but lifestyle factors are more important than what we're doing in the gym. When we start to think about longevity, I'm not talking about I need to get strong for as long as possible. What you're doing in the gym is more important than lifestyle. If the goal is the next 6 months, I need to hit a PR. But when we start talking about our physiology and what's happening to our nervous system when we are trying to get as strong as possible. So just imagine that program that you guys are giving your clients when you're like, the goal is to increase the back squat, right? What does a training session look like? I'd love for you guys to just like type that in if we had time, but a training session, in my opinion, should look like, Brandon, a training session, in my opinion, is focusing on the back squat, right? And letting the goal be the goal. So it's like whatever that priority day is, A is back squatting. And what does that look like if the goal is to express, right? Like we might be doing singles, doubles, or triples. We might be doing, 90 to 98% of your 1 rep max, right? Rest time is very long, right? Like we might do a set and rest 6.5 minutes and then do another set. And maybe we're resting 8.5 minutes after that other set because the goal is to move as much force against that external load as possible. And maybe that client is advanced so they can kind of self or auto regulate. And they're just like, I know if I go back to that barbell at 6.5 minutes, I know I'm not going to be express as much as I could if I waited until 8 minutes. So that might be an hour training session of hitting 6 sets of back squats, right? People hear that and they're like, what? Why would you do that? You're not doing anything else. It's like, well, what's the goal? If the goal for that day is to get as strong as possible in the back squat, we have to honor what the heck's going on under the hood, right? We leave the gym, right, to hit this problem. And now that it's black, I feel like I can now speak better to it. If we're actually trying to honor physiology, what are you doing outside of the gym, right? Are you getting enough sleep, right? Remember what we need to recover during that after that session. So that's Monday, and on Thursday, you might be hitting another tough session in the back squat. So what needs to happen? The CNS needs to recover. For the CNS to recover, you need to get awesome REM sleep. You should probably move some blood outside of the gym. You should probably hydrate effectively to regenerate cells and get ready to go on Thursday, right? You should probably eat decent food that pushes recovery forward instead of pushes it backward. All those lifestyle things are just so important to think about when we're trying to get strength adaptations.
That is really where online strength templates and so many like well-intentioned coaches do fall short in programming for strength, is they're not considering those factors outside of the gym because it just might not be their wheelhouse or what they're being told they need to prioritize to get someone as strong as possible. So if you are writing a strength program for a client and you truly want to help them reach their potential, inside of that, there needs to be discussion around nutrition. There needs to be discussion around lifestyle and what they're doing outside of the gym. That stuff has to happen. Anything else you want to add here on point number 2 before we roll into 3, Carl?
No, I was kind of going down the exercise rabbit hole. So I tried to like bring myself out of that so we can go into the doing too much piece now.
Sounds good. And Natalia just said in the chat box, BLGs. So for those that like, we've got a few first timers on this webinar. BLGs is OPEX language for basic lifestyle guidelines. It's something that we teach inside of our education, the coaching certificate program. And our coaches like have as almost this rallying cry, and they learn to love. It's the simple stuff that Carl said, sun exposure, sleep, hydration, and teaching people to actually, really own those things and how to progress them just like we would exercise. But yeah, that simple stuff becomes sexy once you learn how important it really is.
Yeah, the sexiest thing, I think, right, for coaches that are working with clients, they want to get clients better is results, right? So, whatever we have to do to move our clients forward and get results, if that result is to get them as strong as possible, if that result is to make them feel better, if that result is to make them look better, whatever that is, we have to honor those things that are going to do that. So to George's point, it's like, what is the sexy stuff? The sexy stuff is the stuff that works for your clients. That's it. Because the sexy stuff on the surface, the stuff that doesn't really work for most people in the long term, that's only sexy on like social media, right? Like your clients aren't going home and super excited and pumped up about that. And you're probably not retaining them because you're not getting them results. So yeah, I would just argue that we need to really have our own belief system as coaches. We have to really understand what gets people better. And we'll talk about this in number 4. So I don't want to jump ahead. And the thing that gets people better is usually individualized to that person and their circumstances.
So rolling into problem number 3, which is doing too much. And guys, thank you for bearing with me as I reset my slide share. Google Slides is just having a rough day this morning, I guess. But we have doing too much here up on the screen, which again is, I think, something that very well-intentioned coaches who have all of these grand plans and grand ideas for their clients and how they want to develop strength, they tend to fall into this camp, right? They throw everything that they have at them, and that person ends up doing not what they need for strength building, but what might be more of a hypertrophy-based program.
Yep. And there's a lot of, again, I'm going to throw around like, some concepts and stuff like that. I'm not saying these concepts are wrong. I'm just trying to point out, I think we're usually trying to reach for something that we don't need to reach for. And the doing too much thing is it's a problem. It's a problem for a lot of coaches and clients that are trying to get strong. A lot of the programs that I see when it's like, hey, I want to get as strong as possible, it isn't what I just laid out in like the back squatting for 1 hour and not doing a ton of volume, but doing a ton of intensity in that hour with really, really good recovery between each one of those sets. Usually it's like, well, we're going to hit a top set and then we're going to drop down after that top set because we have to get volume in, right? Or it's like, we're going to hit that A with a bunch of back squats at a very high intensity. And then now B1, B2, C1, C2. Now we're going to do a bunch of hypertrophy training because we have to get our reps in. We have to feel that pump in the musculature. We have to feel like we quote unquote did something. It's like a really good strength building program. Your muscles should feel absolutely fine throughout that entire cycle. Tendons and ligaments and joints and all that stuff might feel a little wrecked, right? Like tail end of a really good intensification phase for strength, but you shouldn't be waking up with sore muscles, right? So doing too much is something that is a huge problem if the goal is to get stronger. And it's like, where does that come from? You know where it comes from? It comes from seeing those really good looking program designs that do have those top sets and drop sets and all of that. There's a time and place for those things. Absolutely. Yes, there is. But that place isn't in a true intensification phase. That place is in a training program for a strength, someone that's really focused on strength. Maybe that's in an accumulation phase and they don't want to lose what it feels like to have a really heavy load on their back. So they're hitting like a 3 top set and then they're doing a bunch of volume. But that's not an intensification phase. That's an accumulation phase. And they just want some intensity exposure inside of that accumulation phase. So hypertrophy is over here, or building muscle, and building strength has to be way over here. I'm only doing this because I think this is as far as my camera goes. So those are really far apart. Whenever you get here in the middle zone, you're actually not doing either effectively. It's okay to be in the middle zone if you're not trying to get as strong as possible and you're not trying to get as jacked as possible. But too many people live in the middle zone while they think they're trying to get really strong or they're trying to build some really good muscle tissue.
And this doesn't just apply to like what's actually happening inside of like the daily design, what's going on in the A's, the B's, the C's, Carl. In terms of doing too much, another consideration would be the layout of the week and what that daily plan looks like. Like someone who's trying to get a really strong squat, you probably don't want them to squat every day, do you?
Well, for an amount of time, that'll work for sure. We talked about this in the podcast. I don't know if you guys remember like 2015, 2016, when squat every day was like the bee's knees. Everyone was doing it. Like, man, I've squatted for 385 straight days. And like, they got like these pretty, some pretty significant gains in their back squat. And then you look back at those people and they're like in wheelchairs and shit and not able to back squat anymore because they just went to the well. Sorry if I'm offending anyone that participated in a squat every day program, but yeah, that's a great example of, hey, you're doing too much if the goal is to be as strong as possible for as long as possible.
Anything else to add to number 3 before we move on to 4, Carl?
No, I think you hit it on like the daily planning. And, sometimes I think coaches might bring like that hypertrophy thought into their daily plans as well, where they're like, well, I got to hit like 15 sets per body part if I want to get strong. It's like, well, back it up. You don't actually have to do that, right? You're thinking about hypertrophy protocols to get stronger. Maybe that's not the best way forward.
All right, so let's roll into number 4. I'm wondering what's going to happen as I click to the next slide. It's not going to let me click it, but number 4 would have been doing the wrong program. And what is the fix for that, Carl?
Get a coach. Get a coach that knows what they're doing. And not to say that like, every good coach always knows what they're doing. Something that I truly believe is a good coach just understands when they're doing the wrong thing or they're doing the thing that doesn't work for that client particularly. So, that's, honoring the individual, right? It's right there on the screen. That's the beauty of individual design. If something's not working, you identify why it's not working for that person. It might not be the program. It might be number 2 and lifestyle, right? So maybe you don't have to pivot away from your awesome training program there. But if someone has a really crappy lifestyle and you have this awesome 6-day per week training plan laid out for them, and their lifestyle doesn't support that 6 day per week training plan, you might have to knock that down to 3. And guess what? You knock it down to 3 and you might start to see this with that client as you're fixing the lifestyle stuff on the side, right? So doing the wrong program is simply doing a program that's not working. That's it. And it doesn't mean that it's a bad program. I'm not saying Smoloff is a bad program just because I see it in the chat box. I'm not saying Smoloff is a bad program. I'm not saying 531 is a bad program. I'm not saying 5x5 is a bad program. I'm not saying push pull legs is a bad program, right? Like I can go all day with like these programs that people just like, live and die by. It's like, that's the right program for an individual at a right time, right? I've used all those programs. Exactly. Julian, is it sustainable, right? Is it sustainable? And are you seeing results from this thing? So I know there's a lot of CCP coaches on the call, and you guys know exactly what I mean, right? How do you identify if it's the right or wrong program? When are you in Coach RX? You're in there every week, right? You see your client getting worse for 3 weeks. It's like, maybe it's time to pivot or have a conversation. You're not just like, but linear periodization, I'm going to add 10 pounds next week. That's like, yeah, that's not working for them clearly. And that's the drawback of template programs. You have people that are following it week by week, and there's no actual feedback of another human saying, hey, maybe consider this. There are AI-driven programs out there that do take into account what you did the prior week, but those AI-driven programs aren't asking you, what did sleep look like last week? What's hydration? Oh, you're getting divorced? How is that affecting your stress levels? Maybe we're not doing 90% back squat sets because your stress is so high and your anxiety is so high. AI is not asking that stuff.
What goes into the right program, Carl? Like what are some of the factors that you need to consider to actually honor the individual and give them the program that's right for them? And this stuff is it's revision for CCP coaches. Like they already do it, but for people that aren't familiar with like how we do individual design, what would that actually look like in process?
Yeah. I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but the first thing that popped in my head when you asked that, Georgia, is how do we get the best results with the simplest prescription per individual, right? And when we start like going down like scientific terms, we start thinking about like minimum effective dose, maximum recoverable volume, all that stuff. So that is a part of it, but it's like, don't even worry about that. Let's simplify it. What's the simplest thing that you can give your client and still see results? Because we could all give a bunch of complex things and see results for an amount of time, but the mastery in coaching and the artistry in coaching, it's like, how do you utilize very simple methods and protocols and get really good results or sustainable results with your clients?
If we're not taking the time on the front end to consult with our clients, to take them through assessment and understand like what their capabilities are and actually be able to draw out priorities, you can't do that. Like you're going to be throwing everything at that person because you don't actually know what that program needs to focus on. So I think taking the step and making sure you're looking at that individual, and like in the OPEX CCP, we teach body move work assessment, we teach intake and consultation practices. That is how, like starting with that data is how you actually simplify a program, because you're not just throwing the kitchen sink, guessing what that person actually needs. Anything else to add here before we move on, Carl?
Nope. I think I think I'm good there.
Awesome. And then just to answer Deepu's question, we will be sharing the recording with you guys by email after the webinar. Let's see what happens if I click next right now. It's not going to happen for me, but that's okay. I have something I want to show you guys. So I'm going to take a moment to exit, stop my share, and then pull my slides back up. So bear with me just 1 second while I do that. Technology.
I'm gonna blame Zoom, not Google. I'm on a Zoom hating spree. So everything's Zoom's fault right now.
We're gonna blame Zoom for why it won't let me click next on my slides, and I've got to go through like 5 steps to get here. But guys, I wanted to share this photo. We always have a conversation at the end of these things about CCP, which is our online coaching, education, and development program. Carl instructs that along with James Fitzgerald, our founder. And that education is done online, right? Like there's video lectures, there's cohort calls that are happening through Zoom. I know you just bash Zoom, Carl, but it is a really good place to get coaches together to be able to learn. But we actually had the opportunity just a couple of weeks ago at our coaches summit to meet a group of those coaches in person, which was just a really cool opportunity to get to like actually, meet these people that we met online. And I know many of those people online are on the webinar today. Yes, Victor Hugo, we'd love to see you in 2022. But Carl, just like briefly reflecting on that experience, could you tell me a little bit, like based on meeting these coaches, what you think makes a CCP coach stand out from, your other fitness professionals?
Yeah, so it's a good question. We talked about this a little a few weeks ago, or like the week after. We kind of recapped this thing, and we talked about the generations of CCP coaches. Not only that were in the room that day, but the generations of CCP coaches that we've seen in live courses and immersions over the years. And there was an evolution that took place. I don't know exactly when it took place. I'm going to just say it was like 2018, 2019. There was an evolution that took place where we said, from a company standpoint, we were like, we need to make everything simpler, right? Like, stuff is just too complex. There's a time and a place for complexity, but that's not going to move this thing forward, right? Talking over people's heads is not going to move this thing forward. Always trying to think about the most complex thing that you can do is not going to really move this thing forward at any substantial level. And just going back to the generations of CCP coaches, I remember being in the room, let's call it 8 years ago, 6 years ago, and the conversations that happened in the room were like here in terms of like what was being said, and even in the language and how people said things. And that was actually a reflection on our education, because you guys that have been a part of this thing for a long time, our education used to be very complex, right? Like, I always go back to like our old assessment movement screen, sorry, not even full assessment. Our old movement screen took like an hour, right? And we were looking at like 60 different things. And we were looking at like pronation and supination of the ankle. And we're looking at, the waiter's bow and what's happening at every lever of the waiter's bow. And it was just so complex. And those conversations that were happening back then were just like so high level that 90% of the coaches in that room were just like, I'm not good enough to be here. I'm not good enough to be a CCP coach. I'm not good enough to be in this industry, right? Fast forward to 2021. I'd actually think about what year it was for a second. I almost said 2022. Fast forward to 2021, and the coaches that we had in the room were very intelligent. We have some very intelligent coaches that are a part of this thing. Some of these coaches have no fitness, like formal fitness education background. Others are PhDs, and they're speaking at the exact same level, right? They're speaking at the exact same level. So that was a very long way of saying the things that come to mind when you ask the question, what stands out with CCP coaches, is CCP coaches have a great ability to simplify things. All the knowledge is still there, but they're just spitting it out in a very simple way. Because who do we work with? We work with normal people. We don't work with PhDs. We don't work with people with kinesiology degrees and biomechanic degrees. So we can't speak that language to them. Even if we know that stuff, we can't speak that language to the end consumer or our clients. So what was really interesting to me on this 2 days, during this 2 days, was everyone's great ability to speak a language that everyone in the room could understand. And that was a huge difference from, 6 or 8 years ago. So let me answer your question by saying CCP coaches have a great ability to simplify the very complex, right? And CCP coaches, and we're working toward this, we're not there yet, but CCP coaches understand what that low-hanging fruit is. They understand that you don't have to throw everything at every single client. And you can see results with most clients forever without even touching anything complex with them. I bet there's people on this call that have worked with people for 10 years. And it's like, you're just everyday person and you're just giving them simple stuff, building really good relationships, and they're happy and they're seeing results and they're healthy and they're vital and all of that. Right. So I think we all know that we can build those really long relationships and have success as coaches without being too complex and complicated.
I think you guys can hear it in Carl's voice that Carl, James Fitzgerald, the whole team here at OPEX are so passionate about this idea of taking things that we love to overcomplicate and things that are complex, like the human body and fitness can be complex, but we want to dial that down and dilute it in a way that is understandable for you and that you can really truly implement to change the lives of the clients that you work with. And we teach that in the OPEX Coaching Certificate Program, or CCP, as you hear it referenced. So if you are a coach that wants to learn that full method and be able to offer your clients a better service, a simpler service, but one that ultimately drives better results, there's never been a better time than today to go ahead and apply to CCP. We're enrolling right now for our January cohort, and we do have spots available to jump in. So I will throw in the chat box a link for you to be able to go ahead, apply, schedule a call, and we'll be able to answer all of the questions that you have, all of the details about what actually goes into the program, because we haven't really talked about that today. We've more talked about what the outcome of CCP is, but that link is there for you. We'd love to have a chat and figure out, if CCP is a great option for you to jump in on that online digital education. And maybe, 2022, we'll see you at the Coaches Summit when we get to meet in person as well. There's one more thing I want to share with you guys before we move on to Q&A. And to do that, I am going to have to change this slide and present again. But this is something we've never actually talked about before on a webinar. And it's a really good option for the person that's like maybe not ready to take the full plunge into professional fitness coaching. You might just love learning about fitness. You're kind of on the fence as to whether you really want to develop those professional skills. Because if that's you, you should go ahead and do CCP if you really want to become a professional fitness coach. But to serve the person that maybe isn't quite there yet and really just wants to learn more about fitness in a really digestible manner, we just launched this new platform called LearnRX, and we haven't really spoken about this publicly yet. This is the first time we're putting it out and actually offering this outside of just our CCP coaches to the public. So for you guys to say thank you for participating in the webinar today, we want to offer you 50% off your first month inside of the LearnRX platform. And just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of what LearnRX is, it is our coaching education subscription. So every week we release a new class, kind of think 30 to 45 minute masterclass style on really diverse fitness topics with really cool guest instructors. And you can see a few of the ones we've released recently on the screen here. We've got 20 plus in there at the moment. And again, that library is growing every day. So again, if you're on the fence, not quite ready to jump into CCP, then get into LearnRX. You've got 50% off your first month with the code STRENGTH50. I'm going to go ahead and pop the link to that platform as well as the code in the chat box. Go ahead, check that out, get yourself signed up for that 50% off. And you can start running through these classes and really dip your toes in OPEX education and get a better understanding of what it is that we do here. Carl, anything to add on LearnRX?
No, I think you hit it really well, Georgia. I just want to apologize for me always smiling like a 10-year-old boy.
Are you talking about your photo?
Yeah.
It's because Carl smiles with his teeth together like this, I think, right? It's the teeth together that you've got to avoid.
No, it's just I don't know, my eyes smile for some reason. I don't know.
I think that's a good thing. I think it means that you're enthusiastic about what you're teaching, and that course specifically is on assessment. So, guys, again, just to recap, CCP is the best option for you if you want to join a network of fitness professionals and learn the full OPEX method, which we've kind of taught you a little tiny bit of today. And then LearnRX is a really good option if you're someone that just wants to dip their toes in education, start learning from OPEX, but not fully ready to take the plunge to CCP. One last important note before we move to Q&A, and that is that if you're a CCP coach, you get a year of free access to LearnRX. So just wanted to throw that out there for anyone that was like trying to decide between the two. You're actually going to get LearnRX as part of CCP. So that's always something to consider as well. So guys, we're going to move on to Q&A now that we've had a little chat on CCP and LearnRX. So any questions you have, please go ahead and throw them in the chat box relative to the discussion on strength today. And just to answer Nolasco's question here, knowledge series videos are inside of the LearnRX platform, but they're only for CCP coaches. And what knowledge series is that he's referencing, that's an exclusive webinar that James does every month for CCP coaches. So that's available, but only for CCP, not just for general LearnRX subscribers. And then I think Courtney had asked above, is CCP for someone who's been in the field for years with multiple other certifications? Yes. I mean, that was Carl when he went through CCP. We had PhDs, as you mentioned, at our Coaches Summit who have a huge background in both the practice of coaching and then in knowledge and actual education side. We have a lot of coaches that come to the program who are brand new and who are 10 or 20 years into their career. And everyone gets something different out of the program and has something different to offer in that cohort style experience as well. All right, just waiting for any questions to roll in. So Shyam has asked if we have any strategies to overcome strength plateaus that we can share today. I know we kind of talked about 4 reasons for strength plateaus, but is there any other general principles you'd consider there, Carl?
No, I think the first thing that we have to do is just identify what the plateau is. That would be number one. So is the plateau the program? Is the plateau the client's execution of the program? Is the plateau something outside of the gym entirely? I think that would be step one. I don't want to throw out like bucketed, like try this type things to overcome plateaus. I think we just have to consider why that plateau is occurring as a starting point. I hope that helps. I know it's not a really good answer for that, but I think we just have to identify that first.
Andrea has asked if there's any tips on how to RX weights during first steps of the life cycle when we don't know their 1RM. So guidelines for picking weights.
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, disconnect from that stuff, right? So when we start looking at the principles of motor learning and accomplishing that goal of motor control, we could think about a lot of different things or things that we can sprinkle in to add variance to that, right? So I know I've hit on the squat a bunch of times, but let's hit on the squat, for instance, right? How do you RX weights for someone that doesn't have an appropriate air squat yet, or they haven't mastered the motor control in the air squat? It's like, you don't, right? Like you master that thing first, right? Let's say that you're 8 weeks in and you're like, okay, the program was great for this person. They squat effectively now. It's like, now how do I RX weights for the goblet squat or the back squat, right? It's like, okay, what's the rep range? How many sets are you doing? What's the intended outcome of that session? So let's say that we're doing, 12s in a goblet squat. The goal should be to challenge motor control, right? External load should challenge motor control. So what does that mean? It's like, if someone's just popping through 12 reps at a fast tempo and they're putting the weight down and they're looking at their watch and they're like, do I really have to rest 2 minutes? Right? It's like, you're not challenging motor control, or you're not challenging that motor learning mechanism that's happening. So it's having a conversation with your client and making it clear, like, hey, we're doing 12s. I want it to feel like this. Maybe you're having conversations of like, we're doing 12s. Choose a weight that you can maybe do 14 to 15 reps with. right? So when you get to 12, you're like, whew, yep, that was pretty good. But motor control was solid. Technique was solid. They were able to RX the tempo that you prescribed to them. And then we can just bring that all the way up to someone hitting like 1 rep max back squats or hitting doubles in the back squat. It's like, we're hitting doubles. I want you to hit this at a rate that you could maybe hit 2.5 or 3 reps, right? If the goal is to be at like that higher RPE. But I think it's just having that conversation with your client and understanding what you want that outcome to be and understanding what external load's role is in resistance training.
Thanks for answering that, Carl. There's so many good questions rolling in, but I'm going to just work from top down. So the next one came from Maya, and she asks, what are your thoughts on conjugate strength training as far as building strength?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I've used a bunch of Louis stuff, and it's the same thing that we talked about at the top of the call, and that idea of periodization and using that undulating technique is good for the right person. I just don't think novice trainees should use that, right? It's like, what is the goal of conjugate? The goal of conjugate is to be ready at all times, right? Louis laid that program out for his lifters to get strong over a long period of time and still be ready to compete at any given time, so they don't have to peak, right? If you have lifters that fall into that and they're ready to perform conjugate methods of strength training, by all means do it. It's great. It's a great concept. But if you have someone that just wants to be more vital and healthier and get strong over a long period of time, you might not have to do that. So yeah, use your best, let's just call it, use the knowledge that you have inside of your head and use your best judgment to choose what's best for that client. But it's important to understand the original intention of every program, right? That was Westside's thoughts on that program. If that intention aligns with your client, use it. If it doesn't, don't use it.
Ernesto has a question that's like a little different from what we've been talking about broadly today, which is more like classic strength development. He asks key differences on how to approach strength for a mixed modal athlete and a weightlifter. Any considerations there?
Yeah, I think it's when we look at like a mixed modal athlete and we look at a weightlifter, there's a lot of stuff you have to do with this person, right? So maximum physical potential for this person is a lot different than it is for the weightlifter. For the weightlifter, it's a lot simpler, right? You know that they have to get on a platform and they have to 1 rep max, a snatch and a clean and jerk in that order, right? For a mixed modal athlete, they might have to do that under fatigue, but they also have to do a bunch of other things, gymnastics, density. They're going to be doing some pretty intense lactate work, some pretty intense aerobic interval work. Even now we're starting to see intervals in competition settings. So it's just less focused on that with a mixed modal athlete, but it's still important along with 50 other things. So it's balancing all of those different things that are important over a long-term training program based on what that athlete's competitive season looks like. For a weightlifter, snatch and clean and jerk, baby. Yeah, a lot more simple.
Ernesto says thank you.
Yeah, for sure. To go deeper into that, I would just get into mixed modal. James is the master there. And he laid out that really robust course for that reason, to answer that question. So I don't know if you've been through that course, Ernesto, but maybe check that out.
We have a question from Fonseca on how do we know when is the right time to change from that 12 to 10 rep range, some more like strength endurance work, into max contraction 1, 2, 3 RM. What are you looking at to make that decision?
It's a lengthy one, but we've answered it before. And the strength life cycle, that's what the strength life cycle actually does. It answers that question. So instead of taking 10 to answer that, George, I don't know if it's possible to put a link to that in the email that goes out, or maybe drop it here. I'm not sure what the best way to do that, but we actually do talk about, based on number of sessions, based on where that client is in their life cycle, based on what the intention is, right? Is it to peak? Is it to learn? Like, what is that intention? We actually laid out rep ranges for that. And or let's just call them rep maximums. So when is it appropriate for someone to really focus on a 10 rep maximum versus a 5 versus a 1? We've laid that out there.
We'll send that out again in the email, that graphic of the strength life cycle.
Awesome. Thanks, Georgia.
So Jess has asked, if you know your client hasn't had good sleep, but they still want to train, what should you do?
I don't know. Sometimes there's some really good things with just dealing with it, right? Just deal with it. There's some, and I'm not saying go to the well all the time when we start talking about training. But if you're talking about someone that's just going in and they're, moving some load around, maybe they're doing some easier aerobic work. It's like people should be able to do that no matter what the circumstances are. If we're talking about someone that needs to go in and they're doing a session, like I mentioned earlier, like the 1 hour of squats, it's probably not a great idea to push the envelope on a session like that. But I'm not in the camp of like, we need to understand our readiness. And if we get 30 minutes less of sleep, we have to reorganize our entire training schedule. There's something called resilience that is very beneficial for people. And circumstances aren't always perfect. So if I was having a conversation with a client and they're like, the goal was just to get in there and move and, get some good training in, I would say, let's use this as a really good opportunity to build some resilience.
Absolutely. It's different, like one night versus chronic sleep deprivation, where that person's only sleeping 5 hours a night ongoing too, right, Carl?
Yeah, definitely. If they're only sleeping 5 hours a night ongoing, and that's a new thing for them, maybe think about how we adjust their training program. If that's just their flow and what they've been used to over the last 20 years, maybe have some conversations on how much sleep is recommended in their age group and try to move them toward getting more sleep. But I wouldn't say don't exercise until you get 8 hours of sleep.
We have a question up above from Akram on, is there any possibility to perform skills while dealing with an injury? So I think just like broadly considerations for programming around injuries, Carl?
Yeah, I think skill work is, times of injuries that might be a good time for a lot of people to focus on skill work outside of intensity. Because we have to have a clear definition of what skill work is, right? Like moving through patterns of resistance is actually skill work. Motor learning by definition is skill work. You're trying to learn the skill of squatting and pushing and pulling and bending and all of that stuff. If we're talking about like skill work and a gymnastics from a gymnastics standpoint of like, I want to learn how to walk on my hands, right? I want to learn how to do a back handspring and all those things. It just depends on what the injury is, right? But if someone has like a sprained ankle and you're like, I want to work on handstand walking with that person, it's like, there's no contraindications of not doing that. There's nothing that's happening physiologically in the ankle that's going to affect skill acquisition. So yeah, I think for some people, that's a great opportunity to work on that.
Awesome. Let's hit one more. So we've got Steph who asks, what are your thoughts on cycling through strength programs and hypertrophy programs back to back? For example, 6 weeks of hypertrophy into 6 weeks of strength focused.
Yeah, so we go pretty deep into this in CCP and thoughts of intensification cycles versus accumulation cycles. So intensifications would be that strength program in a classic sense, and hypertrophy cycles would be that accumulation phase in a classic sense. First, get clear, is the strength program or the intensification phase is the goal to actually get stronger in that block? And in the hypertrophy phase, is it to actually grow muscle? I'm going to assume that both of those are yes. So with that being said, for an intermediate trainee, that's a great idea. So we would just call that classic block periodization. For someone that's advanced, right? So you take someone that's able to really, really express in those true intensification phases, intensity, accumulation intensity might actually be a little bit too much for them to recover from, because those intensification phases are just so taxing. So it depends a lot on training age. Yeah. So for an intermediate person, what you just laid out, Steph, that's exactly what we teach for an intermediate person, if those are their specific goals. For a beginner, it should be a lot of accumulation because they need to learn skills in motor control. And if it's an advanced, trainee, they should do more accumulation because they can't actually recover from a CNS standpoint from that much intensity, because they really go to the well every time they go into an intensification phase because they're just absolutely stronger.
So we're going to wrap up there, guys. As a reminder, go ahead, apply to CCP if you've been thinking about joining. There are spots available for our next cohort at the moment. So jump in, book a call while we still have those available. And then we do have that discount for 50% off your first month in LearnRX with the discount code STRENGTH50. So go ahead, grab that deal. It's only going to be valid for the next 48 hours. So jump in and get that. I know there were a couple other questions. Guys, connect with us offline. You can shoot us an email. If you're in CCP or in LearnRX, we have forums there. You can ask Carl questions every single day if you want to in those forums. So that's another good reason to go ahead and get into CCP if you're not in there already. Guys, thanks for being with us for the last hour. And thank you for all the knowledge, Carl.
Thank you, Georgia, for always being the best MC money can buy. And thanks everyone for jumping on and bearing with us for an hour. I hope you guys got something out of it, and hopefully we see you in CCP or LearnRX. But if you're not a CCP coach, get in CCP.
Bye, guys.
See ya.